Well, hello and welcome, members of the Chinese Medicine Practitioner Meetup Group, hosted by Kamwo. My name is Thomas Liang. I'm the organizer of this group and your host for this afternoon or evening's event, depending on where you are joining us from. I want to take a moment to welcome all the new members to our group. I hope you will enjoy what we have lined up tonight, and hopefully this is the first of many events to come. The mission of our meetup group is to connect members with respected authorities on subject matters within our profession and to create a space where members of our community can come together to learn from each other. The events are always free and our speaker suggestions come from you, the members. So if you have suggestions for our speakers, send them to us. And for the record, this is our 138th event. Seems a lot. By attending tonight, each of you will receive a $20 coupon via the email. So please look for the email that will be forthcoming in the next couple of days. If you don't see it, look in the spam box, okay? So here are the ground rules. Please mute your microphone, but feel free, and I would even encourage you to leave your camera on. Past meetup surveys indicate that it's a moral boost to see other faces what our community is sharing this space. So it's nice. And we want to meet people, see people. You don't have to have it on all the time, but please hold off on questions until our guest speaker gives us the cue to ask. And of course, there will be a Q&A session toward the end. And if it's something urgent and relevant, please type your comment in the chat box and raise your hand. And I, as your host, will address it for you. This way, the lecture doesn't get interrupted. This talk will be approximately 1.5 hours long. So approximately ends around 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And now, without further ado, let me introduce tonight's speaker. It's Lorraine Wilcox. Okay, give me.
My turn?
Yes, no, I'm sorry. Lorraine has been a licensed acupuncturist in Los Angeles since 1989. I'm sorry, I lost my place. She's the author of 2 books on Moxibustion and translator of a number of ancient texts on Chinese medicine, including Miscellaneous Records of a Female Doctor by Tan Yuen Xian. So you are known, I know you from your work with Moxa. This is years ago, but I understand you're also giving talks these days on medicine making. And so that's very excited. So we hope to have you back to talk about that, but we can only do one topic at a time. But I'm just very excited about the Moxa, the work that you have done. So on behalf of the group, we want to welcome you, Lorraine. And I think online we do this to clap, right? So this is what we do. Yay. All right. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for this opportunity. And hi, humans. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to start presenting. Give me a second to get my screen going. And I need to do a couple little things. I want to see chat just in case, and I want a little laser pointer. Okay, so my topic today is talking about indirect moxa, which I'm sure you know is doing moxa on top of an isolating substance, but there's a lot more to it than what you learned in acupuncture school. I think in acupuncture school, all I ever heard about was salt moxa and ginger moxa and garlic. And to be honest, back in the 1980s, I never saw anyone do it in clinic. I mean, it was something I saw in books. And so what, I'm going to talk about is indirect moxa with making something that are called isolating cakes or moxa cakes or something like that. While they're called cakes, they're not tasty, okay? So yeah, indirect moxa is using an isolating substance between the cone and the skin. I do hear some people call moxa sticks indirect moxa, but that they're not called that in Chinese. They're called suspended moxa because they're held in the air. But indirect moxa really refers to some substance on the skin and then the cones on top of that. Generally, you don't need the highest grade moxa floss for that because it's so expensive and it would kind of be a waste if it's not touching your skin. But I pretty much boycott the like cheapest, harshest moxa because there's just so much smoke. And so if you have better grade moxa floss, there's a little less smoke, it's a little less choky. And just, you know, for review before I start talking about the moxa cakes, that generally indirect moxa is used on the chest, on the abdomen, on the back. It's not really used on points. Like, you know, in Chinese books, you don't see it used on stomach 36, for example, or, you know, points on the arms and legs. But if you have joint pain, let's say you have cold pain in the knee, it is possible to use it right on top of the painful spot. But generally it's chosen on points on the chest, abdomen, and back. So, you know, there are not a lot, like CAM, Chinese acupuncture, and Moxibustion only talks about a few types of indirect moxa. And so it seems like a little bit of a limited thing, but the therapeutic function of it is going to be a combination of the point you select, whatever that point does, the moxa will help to treat that, but also combined with the function of the herb. And as you know, even though ginger and garlic are both acrid and warm, but they have different properties, so they're going to do different things. So these are the common ones that you see in books like CAM, or that maybe they talk about in your acupuncture school: ginger, garlic, coarse salt, and futza, which actually I love futza moxa. So I'm going to be talking about that a bit. You know, some of the stuff that you don't see in the introductory textbooks is basically fresh ginger is like quite wonderful, especially if you can get really juicy ginger, if it's like all dried out. Like if you go to, you know, I don't know what your standard grocery stores are there. Here we have like Ralph's and Vons, and you buy it in like the white people's grocery store. It's usually pretty dry. So, you know, you want to make sure you get it in a Chinese market or a Latino market or something, and then it's usually more fresh and juicy. Or you can even grow it in pots on your porch. Well, maybe not in New York, I don't know. So fresh ginger is usually used above the waist. It's not usually used below the waist. It treats, for example, you know, wind cold and wind damp, and wind tends to affect above the waist. It treats, you know, spleen, stomach, it treats lungs, and that's stuff that tends to be above the waist. So generally, while you could use fresh ginger anywhere, it tends to be above the waist. Or if you have cold damp in a joint, you could use it right on the affected site. Garlic is not really used much for indirect moxa, even though they talk about it in the books. What it's most used for is to detoxify sores. So in the old books, you know, if somebody has an abscess that hasn't opened up yet, then they do garlic ginger directly on top of the abscess. Or scrofula, which is not something you and I see. At least I don't think you see it. I don't see it. So garlic is used to detoxify, and therefore, you know, well, unless you're treating dermatology a lot, you're probably not going to be using a lot of garlic moxa. Of course, everybody knows about salt moxa on Ren 8. Well, I say, of course, everybody knows. Maybe some of you don't, but it's easy to find that information. The other one that's mentioned even in books that don't have a huge amount of information is futza. So I'm going to talk about that one. That's the one you want to use for moxa below the waist. And then it has some special uses on Yongquan Kidney 1. And so, yeah, let's talk about futza. You know, again, I went to acupuncture school from 86 to 88, and hopefully the schools are better these days. I do think they are, but we were so scared about futza, like, oh, it's toxic, it can kill you. Well, yeah, that's true. But like they never used food, so they just like scared you about it. And in recent years, I think with a lot of the Jingfang practitioners, there's been a lot more talk about using fuzhe, and there are quite a few people who do use it in internal medicine. But even if you're not ready to use it in internal medicine, it is amazing for doing moxa. It really is one of the things that I'm so glad I played with. So fuzhe, whether, first I'm just going to talk about slices, and then after this slide, I'll start with the moxa cakes, which is the topic. Fuzhe, of course, is, something that's highly warming, and, it is used internally. It doesn't really supplement kidney yang, although it warms, and it's used along with other herbs for kidney yang. It's more in the warming category than the supplementing category, but it does some of both. And so anytime somebody has kidney yang deficiency and you want to do moxa, fuzhe moxa is really the best. So impotence, you could use points like Guan Yuan Ren 4, Ming Men Do 4, points like that, seminal emission, premature ejaculation. So, all kinds of male sexual function, low back pain that's due to coldness or due to kidney yang deficiency. Again, this is used on abscesses or wounds in the old books, which there's some really interesting stuff about this. At least I find it interesting. This is different than the detox of garlic. Garlic would be used on a new abscess that hasn't yet really opened up and been able to discharge its pus, but like a newer one that's still hard and red and so forth, and that detoxifies. But sometimes people get an abscess or a wound that just won't close up, it won't heal. It's kind of, the flesh looks white and dead, and maybe it's oozing a little bit of clear liquid, but it's just not closing up. Okay, so I'm not talking about one that's bright red or anything like that. This is one that's like pale, and the reason for that, according to the old books, is that there's not enough yang qi to close it. Just like yang qi closes the pores, like wei qi is a kind of yang qi and it closes the pores. Kidney qi closes the lower orifices. Qi and yang close and hold things in. So if you have a chronic wound that's not healing, the old doctors said that was due to kidney yang deficiency. And so, of course, internal medicine would be beneficial for it, but they would do fuzhe moxa directly on top of the wound that's not closing up. So that's kind of a special use. That's probably not your everyday use for it. And then there's one more special use of fuzhe moxa, which I just think is amazing. And that's when you use fuzhe moxa on Yongquan kidney 1, like in the picture on the bottom right, that pulls down, when yang rises up to the head, then fuzhe moxa on kidney 1 pulls that yang back down. So you might like worry, oh, wait, they have high blood pressure due to kidney yang deficiency. And, why am I doing moxa on them, much less moxa on fuzhe? But if you do it on kidney 1, it brings yang back towards its source. And one of the things I've kind of come to understand about moxa over the years is that wherever you do moxa, it pulls qi towards it. So in the wounds that don't heal, it pulls qi towards it so it can close up. If you do moxa on do 20, it pulls qi towards it so that prolapse rises back up. If you do moxa on kidney 1, it pulls qi downward towards it. So, when I was doing all my research into moxa, I had to really change a lot of my assumptions about it, that the old doctors really had a whole lot of uses for moxa that, like, they never taught me when I was in school. So basically, if you want to do this fuzhe moxa, you would go to your herb cabinet and you'd look at the slices of fuzhe, and you want to pick ones that don't look cracked. If it's cracked, it's going to end up causing some problems. So you want some slices that look, you know, pretty whole and not, you know, cracked. Okay. And then you have to soak them overnight because you're not going to do it on a dry slice of food. So you want to rehydrate it. And then after it's soaked, maybe overnight, if you try to play with it, then it's almost like a slice of ginger. It's not quite as flexible. It's not quite as lively as a slice of ginger, but it's still, now it's flexible and it's moist. And then you want to poke holes through it with a toothpick, because in indirect moxa, this is something you do. I'll have a slide about that in a little while. You know, then you put it on the side and you try to make good contact between it and the skin, and then you put the cones on top and you light them. When you're using moist substances and they start to dry out, because maybe you've done 3 cones on it and they start to look scorched and dry, then you would change it and use a new slice or a fresh slice. So here I am on the left, soaking the fudza overnight, but you can see this slice here has a crack. I don't know if you can see it depending on how your screen is, but this slice has a crack, so I'm probably going to reject it. What happens is if there's a crack in the slice, too much heat goes through that crack and the patient will say, oh, it feels too hot, it's too hot, much sooner than if you do it on a slice that doesn't have cracks. Okay, so this was for a class, so I'm soaking a whole bunch of fudza, and then after it's soaked, you want to poke holes in it with a toothpick, that's so the moxa chi can go down, but you have to be careful not to crack it when you're poking holes in it. And so little holes are good, but like long cracks are not good for these kinds of things. And then you put it on kidney 1 yongchuan and you burn however many cones. You don't necessarily need to burn a lot of cones because you're not trying to heat up on kidney 1, you're trying to just attract chi, so it doesn't take that many. Like 1 cone might be enough if the patient feels a nice warmth there, maybe 3 cones. They like odd numbers. So the problem with that is if, you know, you don't want to soak the fudza, you know, for days in advance because it's going to go bad or it's going to ferment, or I don't know what's going to happen, but you really only want to soak tonight what you're going to use tomorrow in clinic. And that's a problem because if you don't know that you're going to have a patient that you'd like to do fudza moxa, and the patient comes in and then you decide, oh, fudza moxa would be great, but you haven't soaked any slices, you're kind of out of luck. So this is one of the reasons I started playing with making these herbal cakes. There is not a lot of discussion of herbal cakes in the old books, but in modern journals in Chinese or some of them that are translated into English, it's become like a thing. It's fairly common. Like I get every week a summary of all the abstracts from PubMed that have to do with moxa. And, you know, every week there's like a study or a couple of studies that talk about indirect moxa on herbal cakes for this condition or for that condition. So it seems to be used a lot in modern times. And basically what you're going to do is you need a herbal powder. And right now I'm talking about ground up herb powder. I'm not talking about granules, but I will talk about granules a little later in the slideshow. Okay, and so you want to ground up herbal powder, and then, you know, originally either the Chinese books, you know, I took these from modern Chinese books or from journal studies, and originally I didn't know you needed to mix it with some flour, because a lot of the things, I guess they assumed that you would know that, and I didn't know that. So if you just mix the herbal powder with a liquid and you make a cake, it's going to crumble and not hold together. And if it crumbles while it's on top of the patient and the moxa tips over, that can be a really bad thing. So the secret is to mix it with some kind of binder. And I use, just white flour. I know some of you are gluten-free, but this is for external use. And then I know some of you even don't want white flour even for external use. Well, I'm sure there are other binders because, there's gluten-free bread. So you could use something else besides white flour, but I haven't investigated that. So that has to be your investigation. So basically what I do, I don't really measure, but I take 1 spoonful of the foods powder or whatever I'm using, 1 spoonful of flour, approximately equal portions, and stir them together and add a little liquid, and then just, make a dough, and you just work it with your hands, and you can put that together in like 30 seconds if you have the powder already ground. You could even mix foods powder with flour in advance, so you don't have to add the flour, it's already mixed. And by the way, if you love the way herbs look, I think they're so beautiful, then, but at the bottom of the drawer for foods, sometimes they're like some small and ugly pieces. Those are the ones you can grind. Keep the pretty pieces for, somebody's formula, so they can appreciate the beauty of the nice slice of foods or whatever. So yeah, like the little pieces at the bottom of the box, grind them and sift them. You do want it sifted because you don't want it coarse, you want it fine. And so that's basically it. You can use any herb, grind it up, mix it with some flour, mix it with some liquid. The liquid depends on what it is, and work it. And there you've got herbal cakes. So basically, you want to make something that looks kind of like a Ritz cracker, but smaller, and and it's not cooked, and it doesn't have to be so perfect. Like, I'm a messy person, so you can see mine look pretty ugly, but they work. And so, yeah, I poke, a few holes, 5 holes, 3 holes, whatever. So these cakes are like, the word in Chinese bing means like a flat cake, like a pancake, or like those scallion pancakes. It's not like a cake, like a birthday cake kind of cake. So it's like a flat cake is the word that they use in Chinese. And so you form it into little coins, or you can cut it into squares and then poke holes. And yeah, this can be really, really quick to do. So in the beginning, I didn't really trust that they would hold together. Now I have more trust because I've worked with it so many times. But one of the things you can do is just take a piece of gauze and put the cake on top of the gauze. And there still could be good contact, the qi, the herbal qi, the moxa qi can pass through the gauze. And then, if the patient says it's hot, you don't have to rely on picking it up by the cake. You can pick it up by the piece of gauze. And so that made me a little more confident in the beginning. But that is an optional step. Just in case you've never powdered herbs, I have a little herb grinder. It doesn't have a very big chamber because mostly I'm just experimenting and making stuff for myself. If I had a big pharmacy, I'd have like the chamber is where you put all the herbs in, like this part here is the chamber, right? So, these are loud. They get hot, they overheat. You have to really baby them or you'll burn the motor out. But, you throw your herbs in, you can see these are like little crummy pieces of fruits and not like beautiful slices. You grind it and then you want to sift it because you don't want the cake giving your patient splinters, right? You want it nice and smooth, like white flour is nice and smooth. And you keep the sifted stuff, and the stuff that doesn't pass through the sieve, you put back in the grinder until you get tired of trying to regrind it. And then there's a little bit that you always throw away at the end, hopefully not too much. These photos were taken a long time ago at one of the schools where I work. I should replace them with new photos. But these days I use like glass and I don't use plastic anymore. But this was back, 10 years ago. I don't know how long ago. So you want to keep it in a airtight container, whether it's a Ziploc or whether it's a jar that seals. But you could at this point mix an approximately equal amount of flour in. If that's the only thing you're ever going to do with this is make matzo cakes, you could pre-mix the flour and that would save time when you want to make it. So, okay, here we are, indirect matzo using Fudza cakes. You can mix it with just water. It says hot water, whatever. Or it is sometimes said that you should mix it with huangjiu, which is this yellow rice wine that's used like when you do paojiu, when you process herbs, they often use this huangjiu for it. Or like if you're making shudi huang, it's, from Shengdi or Xiandi, then you use this huangjiu, this yellow rice wine, which you can get at pretty much any Chinese grocery store. So if I have it, I use it. Mostly I have it. If I don't have it, water is fine. And so the uses are the same. We already talked about how to use Fudza. And so always poke little holes in the cake with a toothpick and change them when they get scorched and dry. This patient on the right, he was actually a student at one of the schools where I teach, and in his techniques class, somebody needled Shenma UB62 a little too aggressively, and he had pain afterwards, like maybe they hit the bone with the needle, I'm not sure. But when I did Fudza Moxa on him, he felt like a chi sensation running up the UB channel, up his leg. There is such a thing as moxa chi, just like people talk about de chi, like when you're needling, obtaining chi when you're needling. There is moxa chi, but not everybody feels it, but some people feel it. And it's really interesting when they do. Anyway, so it's surprising. Fudza looks dark before it's ground up, but it makes a very white cake. Some of the herbs will make darker cakes. Okay. So that's Fudza. I really think you should play with it if you haven't. Oh, well, here, I'm not done with Fudza yet. So I have an old tea container that I'm keeping the Fudza powder in now. And I have another little container that I have flour ready for when I'm going to make the matzo cakes. And here I've got some huangjiu, the yellow rice wine. And so I'm mixing them in a bowl and, using the little rice wine to make the matzo cakes. I'm poking holes in it. You can see I'm a messy person. The holes are kind of off center. Oh, well. And these aren't from the same series as the previous couple of slides. I teach sometimes a matzo class, although I haven't taught it since COVID. It's like an elective in some of the schools where I've taught. And so these are students playing with Fudza isolated matzo cakes, right? So you can see below the umbilicus, I told you, is really where you want to use Fudza, or on the lower back is where it's really, really nice. So that's the introduction to matzo cakes and so forth. I'm used to asking if there are any questions. If you have questions, type them in chat. But in any case, I'm going to keep going since there are no questions in chat. You have your hand up, Tom?
Actually, I do have questions.
Okay.
So I actually have a few. In the matzo, I know that Heiner has the Fire Spirit School matzo, which is a higher grade. Do you see there's a need to use the higher grade matzo, or it's just the regular matzo? I mean, it's the regular, I'm sorry, Fudza. I'm talking about the Heiner had the higher grade Fudza.
Fudza.
Fudza, not matzo, I'm sorry.
For internal medicine, I would care more about the quality of the herbs. For external medicine, I'm not personally as concerned. I mean, sure, if you have the money to burn,
Yeah.
If your patient has the money to burn, but I'm more like power to the people. And so, if there's a less expensive alternative, I think for external medicine, I'm fine with that. But everybody has to make their own decision.
Okay. That was my, and then my second question, you mentioned a couple of times that when we use foods and cakes, that it should be below the waist. Is that a hard rule? And
no.
How is that? And
go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, and when is that rule? Because I actually in our clinic, in the Pacific, one of the practitioners, the supervisors, have done the foods and cakes. Predominantly lower jiao, but also on the umbilicus. Is that how?
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, I don't mean literally, like, if it's at the waist, that's fine. Okay. But, I wouldn't really do it like for a lung thing, for example. I wouldn't do it for a spleen thing, even unless it was spleen and kidneys together. It's more kidney related, and that's going to be at the waist or below the waist. And things are, in Chinese medicine, it's all guidelines. There are very few rules. And guidelines always have times when there is a reason to use it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. For example, a wound that doesn't heal above the waist, you still might want to do futsa on it and so forth. So yeah, be flexible is kind of what we have to try to do, but not be wild with what we're doing, but be flexible. What do you think?
Okay. Great, thank you. No, I agree. That's why I was at. Is that a hard rule or is that generality? Okay, thank you.
I think the newer you are to practicing medicine, the harder the rules are, and then the more experience you have, the softer the rules are. Because the rules will keep you out of trouble, but then you have to know when to break the rules. So I'd rather call them guidelines. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, then I'll keep going. So actually flour cakes are used by themselves, just like flour and water, just like making like plain flour dough, to detoxify sores again and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm not, I'll use the garlic if I want to detoxify, but you can just make flour and water and make like a little bowl and then put powdered herbs inside the bowl and then burn moxa on top. The problem with that is that what's below the moxa cone is going to be pretty thick. So it may take a few cones for the heat to penetrate into the point. By the way, if you've never done indirect moxa with slices that are moist or with cakes, when you take off the cake, there should be a little bit of moisture on the point below. And there's some herbal moisture that can be absorbed through the point. Points are openings into the channel system and they can absorb herbal qi, but the heat also helps it to penetrate, and moxa qi helps it to penetrate. So when you use moist cakes, there's going to be some moisture underneath. You never want to make moxa sores when you're using cakes. Moxa sores do have their uses, although our malpractice may not be happy about that. But that moxa sores would only be used with direct moxa. And although mostly we're going to do direct moxa without making moxa sores, but if you made a moxa sore with indirect moxa, you're probably messed up. Yeah, you don't want to do that. Okay, so yeah, you can make just a little flour and water base and then put powdered herbs on top, and you could do that on the umbilicus instead of using salt and other kinds of things. That one's not very exciting to me. Okay, here's another one. These are all from like Chinese sources. Bai hu jiao is like white pepper. and dingxiang and roguei. You can grind them up together to do a little mini formula, mix with flour and water to disperse cold, to move warm and move qi in the channels to stop pain. So it's used for wind, cold, or damp B patterns. And, some of these things are also good for nausea and vomiting or abdominal pain. There are just so many. Once you get the idea, you can use any herb. There's so many things you can do with this. Chuanjiao is an amazing thing. It's also called huajiao. It's Sichuan pepper. So, you can find that in grocery stores sometimes. And so, that can be ground up into powder and mixed with vinegar, which is something that is used in external medicine to stop pain, and flour. And then for painful toxic swellings, well, we've already got a number of alternatives for toxic swellings. Garlic is kind of easy. But for like jiedam medicine, for martial arts kind of medicine, knocks, falls, and sprains, Sichuan pepper has very pain relieving characteristics. And, a bunch of other stuff. It's used for cold pain, epigastric pain, vomiting clear fluids, cold, diarrhea or dysentery, and so forth. Sichuan pepper is also amazing, mixed with coarse salt and then heated. Like you can dry stir fry it and put it in a bag, or you could just put it in a bag and then put it in the microwave for a few seconds, and then use that for what's called ironing, which is using it as a hot compress on a painful area or when it's cold type pain. And it's just so, it feels so good. Yeah. And no smoke if you do it that way. Ironing is a whole nother topic that patients love. So, we're getting more and more wild here. Well, I don't know if it's wild, but this is stuff that like I never would have dreamed of when I was in acupuncture school. Sangju, which is an herb I like a lot, of course, dries dampness and assists the spleen. And so, here it lists diarrhea and poor digestion, but, in Bansao Gangmo, which is this Ming Dynasty amazing book by Li Shizhen, that goes over the herbs one by one, you go read about Sangju in Bansao Gangmo. Ghosts hate Sangju. So if you are worried about if a patient even thinks they have a ghost, you may not think they have a ghost, but the patient thinks they have a ghost, you can tell them that the Ming Dynasty text says that this herb, ghosts hate it, and do moxa on, some points for, this is anti-ghost. I also make an incense with Sangju, and, it may not be the highest, most elegant incense you've ever, smelled, but it really does smell good. Some herbs smell horrible when you burn them. They might smell good when you, just sniff them, but some herbs don't smell good when you burn them, but Sangju is really nice. So Sangju incense to keep the ghosts away. Well, I'm agnostic about ghosts. I don't believe in them. I don't not believe in them. But, it doesn't hurt to burn some Sangju incense if, or to tell your patient this is anti-ghost incense if they have these kinds of worries, and whether it's placebo or whether ghosts really do hate this. Sangju has some amazing stuff that they didn't teach me when I was in school, right? Okay, so Shangfu, here this says for epigastric pain and phlegm nodules and stuff like that. But, Changfu is used a lot in gynecology. And so that also would be good for, qi stagnation, blood stasis, cold, pain related to gynecology. That one is supposed to be mixed with ginger juice. So this is the first time we've come across ginger juice. I'm going to talk about that. Always I have the same note at the bottom because that's more of a rule, not just a guideline. That's maybe more of a rule to how you do it. You probably know that, and that there's a Chinese like grater thing that you grate the ginger on, and then some juice goes down into little, I don't know how to explain it, but there's like a particular Chinese kitchen tool to make ginger juice. It's like, oh, I can't do that. So actually, I've found in Chinese sources, they've said to, just cut chunks of ginger, put them in the blender with a minimum of water, liquefy it, and then I'm straining it through a cloth bag here. And so the ginger juice is a little bit diluted, but not that much. And then you can make a whole bunch at once and freeze it in ice cube trays, and then just take out one ice cube when you need it and, let it warm up, obviously. But, you don't have to make ginger juice every time. So the previous one, Xiangfu, wanted ginger juice. You could do it with water if that's all you had. But, if you can do it with ginger juice, that adds a little extra power to it. We've also got Chenpi and Herbal. I never can pronounce Herbal. I hope that's more or less how you pronounce it. They want ginger juice too. And basically you can, if you know what Chenpi does, then that's what it's going to be good for: distension or fullness of the abdomen, for digestion, vomiting, belching, hiccups. Yeah, makes sense. It regulates qi. And so generally you're going to use something like Chenpi on points that have to do with, spleen, stomach. Yeah. Okay, Denise, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so there's, chat stuff. Yeah. So hopeful, again, it's a qi regulator. You might notice that like the herbs that we use in Moxa are going to be warming, often acrid, and have certain characteristics. So maybe there's some herbs that you're less likely to use and make into cakes. Anyway, okay, so these regulate qi, and you're probably going to use them a little bit more on the middle to upper jiao and a little bit not as much on the lower jiao. Okay. So any questions up to this point, or should I really try and save it for the end? Tom.
So I just want to make a point about the ghosts. I just want to contribute a little bit here. Just growing up in Chinese culture, those who are more susceptible to ghosts or more likely to encounter ghosts are those that have a more yin or yang deficiency, tend to be have a yin constitution. They're usually more sick and early. And then there's a saying where those who have strong yang qi are not afraid of ghosts. And I think that from a modern medical standpoint, you can see those who are sick and have a weaker constitution are more susceptible to, I don't know, maybe it could be hallucinations or whatnot because of their condition. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Those who have the strong yang qi are not afraid of ghosts. I always hear that when I was just growing up in the TCM family. And it just seems a little mystique. But in the context of what we just talking about and how these substances are more boost your yang, I can see that there's a reason. That could be an explanation.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that Sangju is used a lot in like damp epidemics, like even burnt. Like they would just put some alcohol on it and burn it to like fumigate the room in damp epidemics. And damp is another yin substance, so Sangju gets rid of yin stuff, and it kind of cleans up the turbidity and so forth. There's a question about how do you make incense. Uh, I mean, it depends what kind of incense. If you want the kind that burns like cones or sticks, there's like a special ingredient called mako, M-A-K-K-O. But like that's a whole nother class. I mean, we could talk about making medicinal incense. I've also played with things like making xiaoyasan incense. So somebody comes in and they're all irritable and stuff. You can burn a little xiaoyasan incense, and maybe as they breathe it, it can like relax them a little. I mean, I don't know how effective this stuff is, but it's just fun to play with it. Any way to use it for styes? Well, are you talking about moxa or incense? Anyway, I don't have anything specific for styes. It's like you're not generally doing moxa near the eyes. Yeah. So how about like kind of random unrelated questions I'll deal with at the end of class for whatever time there is. And then if there's a question very specific to this class, then I'll try and address it as we go through. So I keep going. Yes. You know, we did see one had 3 herbs in it. What did it have? It had cinnamon and cloves, and I forget if the other one was the white pepper, but here's some formulas. Like I told you, I get these, you know, summaries once a week of anything about moxa from PubMed. You can set up these alerts and then they send you emails and so forth. And so, you know, sometimes I only get the abstract because you have to pay for the whole article, and sometimes, you know, the whole article is for free. I don't actually care about like how things did in the study, but I figure when looking for recipes like this, that a bunch of smart people thought this would be good for whatever condition that they're testing. And so, you know, I'm not about quoting statistics. I'm just like about stealing their formulas. So here's a formula for, you know, like high cholesterol, high triglycerides. So they use danqian, chashen, yujin, and dahuang and zixie. Forgive my pronunciation. I don't speak Chinese, even if I read it. Okay, so you want to powder the herbs, mix with rice vinegar, and make the moxa cakes. I don't care. It says 3 grams, whatever. I mean, for studies, they have to say that. But for my kitchen, I can do it however I want. And then these are the points that they used bilaterally. And they had 3 cones per point per session. And then even after the last cone burns down, the cakes would remain for 30 minutes. They'd stay there lying for 30 minutes, 3 times a week for 6 weeks. Well, you know, in the West, a lot of patients aren't going to come 3 times a week for 6 weeks, but still, you know, here's like a formula, here's some suggested points. You know, I think this kind of stuff is useful and cool. Here's another one for senile osteoporosis, which just, of course, means, you know, old people get osteoporosis. So they had, these are, you know, kidney supplementing herbs, bugujir, shudi. Huangqi is actually not a kidney supplementing herb generally. Dangshan, yin yang huo, xian mao, dingxiang, rogui. Okay, so, you know, there's another little formula that you could grind up a whole bunch of it and just have it. You know, you don't want to grind herbs like bit by bit. If you're going to grind herbs, it's a big pain. You should do a whole bunch of it and then have it. Anyway, so they had 4 different point formulas that you were alternating every other day for 6 months. Can you believe it? Like, who's going to do that? But still, these are clues that you can adapt and use in your clinic. And here's a study. You know, I really like Xiaoyao-san. I think it's overprescribed. I totally think it's overprescribed, but I like playing with it in different contexts. So I've made Xiaoyao-san incense, as I've told you, and you know, I make Xiaoyao-san. It's a san, so it's a powdered formula, and so that's, you know, these days, like if a formula was originally a powdered formula, I make it as a powdered formula. I do try to mostly follow the ancients when I can. Anyway, so you're going to make the cakes out of xiaoyaosan. You grind up some xiaoyaosan, mix it with a little bit of flour, make the herbal cakes, and then do moxa on with those cakes on Ren 8, Ren 4, stomach 36, and liver 14. And this was for rats who had chronic fatigue. Somehow they induced chronic fatigue in the poor rats, but at least the rats get some moxa. Poor rats. Anyway, 5 cones each point, once daily for 10 days. And they decided that xiaoyaosan this way can mitigate stress behavior in rats. And some other blah, blah, blah stuff. Mostly I don't like rat studies, but it's xiaoyaosan. So you can see that like you're only limited by what you can conceive of in your mind. You know, you could use any individual herb pretty much. You could use formulas. You could put together little mini formulas for various things. And so this really expands the range of maybe what moxa can do and treat. And there's also something called medicinal application Moxibustion, or it's sometimes called point application, where you make up a herbal paste like this and you just tape it to a point and leave it on for maybe 24 hours, depends on what's in the paste. So some of this stuff, like you could make those xiaoyaosan cakes and not even use moxa, but just like, you know, make a little bolus of it and tape it onto liver 3 or liver 14, and then tell the patient to take it off the next day. And maybe you give them a supply to last for a few, you know, weeks or a few days or something like that. So there's just so much you can figure out and experiment and play with. Okay. I know a lot of you use granules. I understand how convenient granules are. I personally have not been very interested in granules, so I should tell you I'm not practicing. So I don't have to be practical. I'm just experimenting in my kitchen and writing about it, taking photos and making videos. But everybody wants to know how to use granules for the various things that I've played with. And so eventually I posted on Facebook, does anyone have some expired granules you can give me just so I can experiment with them? So somebody gave me 3 bottles of expired granules, and then I could experiment, like, how do you do this? How do you do that? Not for patients, but just to figure out the process. And so, yeah, if you want to use moxa cakes, if using granules instead of ground up herbs, you can do that. And to be honest, I don't know how your malpractice feels. I don't know how you feel. But if I had some expired granules, I would not feel so bad about using them as external medicine. I'd feel worse about using them as internal medicine. But maybe that's heresy and I shouldn't have said that. Okay, you can bleep that out if that's really bad. I'm joking. You don't have to bleep it out. So anyway, here's the deal. Granules dissolve, whereas powdered herbs don't dissolve, right? If I put like hot water on powdered herbs, there's going to be a lot of residue in the bottom. Just like if I put hot water on coffee, there are going to be grounds at the bottom. But if I put hot water on granules, they dissolve. So you can see they act differently. And therefore, when you make stuff with granules, besides just making tea, when you make stuff with granules, you're going to have to do things a little bit differently if it was a formula for powdered herbs. And by powdered, when I say powdered herbs, I mean ground up herbs. And then when I mean granules, I say granules. So I reserve the word powder for ground up herbs, and I reserve the word granule for those things. So powdered herbs add some body to the herbal cake. They have physical substance that doesn't dissolve. So if you just put a bunch of granules in the bowl and you dripped in some water, it would just make a gloppy mess that would never be really solid. And if you did use so much granule that it becomes solid, it's going to be like 10 times stronger than if you use the individual, it's just not the same. So basically, you can make these herbal cakes, but you're going to need more flour to add the body that's lacking from the granules or whatever you use for binder. Otherwise, the process is the same. So here's some random expired danshen. Okay, it's not because I thought we should do moxa cakes with danshen. That was just one of the expired ones that was given to me. And so I put some in the bowl and I put some flour in the bowl with it. You can see the dark is the danshen granules and the flour is the white stuff. And then I'm dripping in some water that was in this little thing and stirring to mix it. And it is more messy. It really, your fingers don't have to look all that dirty when you're using powdered herbs. This is a little bit more sticky. Maybe I should put more flour in it, but definitely you get a cake that will hold up. You just have to use more flour. You poke holes in it, of course, and then you can put it aside and wash your hands before you start touching the patient. Yeah. So yeah, you can, if you want to try some of these and you don't have a grinder or you don't have a pharmacy with slices of herbs, you can try it with the granules and see what you think. Okay. I'm moving on to the next topic unless there's some questions related to this. Okay. Looks delicious. Don't eat them though. Okay, dry moxa cakes. So everything I've talked about so far is moist, but there are dry moxa cakes that the recipes for that I've only seen again in modern books. These aren't ancient. And the person I first learned about this from, named Tim Ross, he called them moxa cookies. But in some ways, maybe we shouldn't call them cakes or cookies because then somebody might think, oh, I can eat them. So maybe we should call them discs or something. I don't know, but don't eat these. Okay. So this recipe is a generic moxa cookie. So it's not for a particular condition, but it's just supposed to help the moxa warm the channels and the jing and the wo. It move qi and blood, relieve pain. And the herbs are supposed to really help it penetrate, help it warm, and help it to move. And so these can be prepared and kept indefinitely if the bugs don't get them. So Tom said, wow, these look delicious, but the bugs do think they're delicious. And so you have to really, really store these in an airtight container. So here's this recipe. Wow, I even put the Latin in. Did I do that for the whole slideshow? I don't generally use the Latin. Anyway, you can see there's a lot of jianghuang, which is like turmeric, right? And chuanjiao, Sichuan pepper, and they put some moxa actually in the recipe. And I've made it two ways. One way is you just grind it along with everything else, and then there's lots of fiber. And the other way is that, I also teach how do you make moxa floss. And when you do that, you keep the fiber and you get rid of the powder that is the rest of the moxa leaf. So I have jars of powder from Aizao. And so the other way I've made it is by using the powder without the fiber. So in this picture back here, you can kind of see it's coarse. You can see some fibers in it, and that is pretty coarse. So that's when I used the whole leaf. And so there's some, moxa fiber within it. But if you sift it and just use moxa powder, then you can have a smoother cookie. Anyway, I don't need to read you the whole recipe. These are pretty common herbs. I don't think there's anything very unusual in here. This makes a lot, by the way. So I'm just warning you. Sometimes like I don't have a conception of how much that's going to make. And then I'm stuck for hours just like working on something because it's huge. This recipe also calls for juice from a whole bunch of ginger, 1 cup of water, a half a cup of honey. I don't know if the honey's necessary, but that's the original recipe that I got. And 1.5 cups of wheat flour. And so basically I told you how to make the ginger juice. And so in this case, you can just put the ginger and the water in the blender together and then strain out the solids. That's what you could do. So mix, it together and so you just like make a dough, and then you have to knead it a little because of the white flour. You want it to stick together. You can't just stir it. You have to knead it a little bit, and then you can roll it out, and you could just cut it with a knife into squares, or you can see I use cookie cutter, which is a lot of work, but it's kind of cool looking. Poke holes in it, and then the original recipe says to bake at 315 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 minutes, but I've used just the food dehydrator also sometimes rather than baking it. And you don't want to put them away until they're room temperature and totally dry, because you do want to put them in a sealed container so the bugs don't get them. But if they're still moist, they'll go moldy. So you want to make absolutely sure that they're dry. And this recipe, when I used, those are about the size of a Ritz cracker, maybe slightly smaller. And I counted 135 cookies, just in case you're wondering. And you can do a lot of cones on one cookie. But, of course, you're only going to use one cookie on the same patient. You're not going to use it on a different patient. So here, this is a different recipe. You'll see the recipe in a minute, but you can see I was lazy in that one and just cut them into squares, and that works just fine. I'm always poking holes in things, different cookie cutter. And so you would use that just like a slice of ginger, but it won't have the moisture underneath because it's a dry thing. But this is nice because you can make a whole big batch and then use them for a long time, and you don't have to worry about them going bad or, pre-soaking or anything like that. So these are, kind of convenient and nice. Making them is a pain. Maybe Kamwo can sell them. You don't have a product like that, do you? Dry moxa cookies?
No, I was going to question that I was going to ask you if there's commercial preparation that you're aware of. And if not, are you going to start the Lorraine Cookie Factory?
I know that people have come back from China with some that they bought there, but I've never seen them advertised. I've never seen them on anyone's webpage for sale in the US.
I'll keep my eye open on the next trade show.
Okay. I don't even know. They may have gotten them from a hospital that they were in, and they may not even be commercially available in China. So I don't know.
Okay.
But I think these are convenient. So here's another recipe. It's just rogué and fuzza and mugwort powder, which, I have told you how I saved the powder from making moxa floss. And white flour to hold it together. And this one warms yang, returns yang to its source. So, because it has rogué and fuzza, you're probably going to use it at the umbilicus and below, not for lungs and spleen and stuff like that. Here's another recipe that I just, I collect. When I find these recipes, I just throw them in. So I have random recipes. I don't have recipes for everything. Here's one for endometriosis. It probably came from some clinical trial, but I was bad and didn't write down where I got it. I don't think I need to read you these recipes. You can look at them on your own. Here is one that's supposed to be, so this is from some trial also for prolapse of lumbar disc, and it has the main recipe, but then it has like some add-on herbs. Like if it's from trauma, add these herbs. If it's, due to coldness, add those herbs. And that's my slideshow. So I want to thank Tom and Kamwo for inviting me and you for being here, although I'm not hanging up yet, but I just am finishing off the slideshow. And I hope Tom doesn't mind, but I have a YouTube channel now and my videos are not professional at all, but I have videos of how to make this and how to do that. And, I have some other videos that have to do with stuff I've translated and this and that, but there is a playlist for Moxas. So I have videos about these indirect cakes, Moxa cakes there if you want to see me making it. So
Lorraine, you send me the links. I'll be included when we upload this video on our YouTube channel. We'll put the links on the video so people can just click. So if you're watching this in the future, you can just click the links that will be
I'll send them, but also, somebody asked me about how do you make incense, and like their videos about that. Their videos about all kinds of stuff. Because it was just my obsession in COVID when I was isolated and not going out. I just made stuff and made videos. So
fantastic. Does anyone have any questions for Lorraine? No,
I think there was something going back in the chat a while that I said, okay, so I talked a little bit, how do you make incense? You need this ingredient called mako, but really you can get the whole deal if you look at like the videos. I have the recipes and this and that. And Denise said, I made ginger juice ice cubes and it's easy. Couldn't find any ginger juice without cayenne pepper in it. Yeah, it's really pretty easy. It probably takes 10 minutes. Well, and then the time for it to freeze. And then I don't know. Sorry, I don't know anything about styes and treating styes. Somebody says they would be happy for an incense class. I think that's what they're referring to. Yeah, expired herb. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. Thank you, humans. And distal points, yeah, that would be good. Probably so Fujimaksa, on kidney 1, there's a lot of discussion about that in various Chinese books. And so, for example, if you have sores in the mouth, then they say do Fujimaksa on kidney 1, and that will pull down the heat. So I imagine that you could think maybe, that might also pull down the heat from a sty, but I'm not sure. Yeah, that's my thought. Maybe a liver point too, I don't know. Sometimes cooling herbs are used in moxa. There are some things like there's one, what's it called? I can't pronounce it, the OJ, which is the node of the lotus.
Oh yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, like OJ, like orange juice or something. Sorry, I can't really speak Chinese, but that's a cooling herb, but that is used as indirect moxa, like a slice of it for high blood pressure on certain points. So for certain things like high blood pressure, you might want to use moxa, but cooling herbs. It's really, there's so much out there that we didn't learn in school. So then there's another, Tom says, can you talk about if burning needles can be used with moxa cake? I don't understand.
So I love using the moxa on the head of the needle.
Yeah.
Is there a way that, like, how the moxa cake, there's holes that we can actually needle through that hole and then have the moxa on top? Have you ever experimented with anything like that?
I don't think you could call that clean needle technique.
Okay, fair.
So, when I went to school, like clean needle technique, whatever, just grab the shaft of the needle and manipulate it. When I went to school in the 80s, but like pretty soon after that. You
can put the needle in and then you can put the cake through the head of the needle and then, put the ball on.
I don't think the CNT people would like it, but I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm just, yeah. Because they're fussy, the CNT people, aren't they? But it's good to be fussy about certain things. So here's what I would do though. Do the moxa on top of the needle, remove the needle when you're done. And instead of using these cakes as indirect moxa, I'd use them as point application. So you slap on one of those cakes, tape it on, and tell them to take it off tomorrow morning. That's what I would do if I wanted to do something like that. Yeah. So, hi, Lorraine, in your opinion, would a slice of dry aconite be more powerful than a cake of ground food? So, you know, I wouldn't do that. And like, I don't have an explanation immediately of why I wouldn't do that. But, you know, the heat will be conducted through the slice of foods pretty quickly. And, you know, it won't have the juices that are going on to the point. So I think that's a different experience. What I would do if I wanted to use dry foods is I'd make like dry moxa cookies with a lot of foods in it, because somehow doing it on the dough, that's even though it's been baked and dried, seems different than doing it on the slice. What I would do if I were you and interested in that is I'd try it on myself. And if you burn yourself, oh, well, you know, it's wrong. I've burnt myself so many times trying things, working out how to do things. So I would try it on myself first. And then if it works, great. If it doesn't work, I'd look for another way. But, you know, you don't need, I mean, things need an appropriate amount of strength. Things don't need maximum strength for everything. And those, you know, the moist foods or the foods or the, you know, cakes, foods of cakes that are moist, or the cookie recipes that are dried, they seem to work really nicely. So I don't think you need to worry about making it stronger and stronger and stronger. It's, you know, enough. Enough is enough, right? What else? Yeah, there must be. Can you tell me gluten-free, like what would you use instead of white flour if you really wanted to do this gluten-free, but you wanted the cookies to hold together, Denise? Do you know?
Can I talk?
Yeah.
Please, absolutely.
I would just say, you know, I've got several different gluten-free flour mixes and I can see which one would be best to use. I mean, just try with them. And, you know, there are always a mix of different kinds of flours. So I'd have to experiment.
So have you actually made bread with a gluten-free flour?
Yes.
And so you found one that makes nice bread dough?
Yeah, but but like I said, they're all a mix of like Gilles said, tapioca would be great. But they also sometimes have rice flour, chickpea flour sometimes. So, you know,
you just really need it to hold together and not crumble.
Exactly.
And that's the issue. And I just don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for your experience and sharing.
Okay. Is there any other questions for our guest speaker, Lorraine? And if not, and then on behalf of the group, Lorraine, thank you so much for being so generous with your knowledge and your time. And we appreciate we appreciate not only for tonight, but also the good work you do and your translations and your books. Well, I appreciate it. And I'm sure a lot of us in the profession also as well. Okay, so thank you for everyone for attending tonight. Be sure to check your inbox on your spam folder for your coupon. It'll be coming, and then all the links that Lorraine talked about, she would send them to me, and I will include them in the YouTube video. And I'll send a link to the YouTube video, which will be available in a couple of days. We have to do a little edit, of course. And okay, well, thank you very much for coming and attending, and I'll see you guys at the next event.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lorraine. Bye-bye.
Bye.